Well, I believe we have everybody here, correct? So let's just do a little roll call and make sure we have our people that need to be here are on. So do we have Chief Rhodes here?
Was.
Chief Rhodes, is you're good? Okay, we have connectivity, and we should have battalion chiefs here, or deputy chiefs, so that's good. We have our commission members, Brian, looks like Beth,
Yes.
Teresa, Linda, so we should be here. Looks like we can start the meeting, so let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is 7:01 on this lovely Wednesday, July 15th. Let's begin with first order of business, which is approval of the agenda, or excuse me, appropriate meeting notices. Let's start there first. Jenny?
Yes.
Thank you. Approval of the tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Teresa and seconded by who?
Linda.
Linda? All right. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion
Linda.
passes.
5203 is Pete.
Oh, Pete Maury? Okay. All right. Item 3 on the agenda, approval of the minutes from June 17th, 2020. Were there any corrections or?
Motion to approve.
I'll second that.
All right. So motion by Linda, seconded by Bill to approve the minutes from June 17th, 2020. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion passes. Public participation. Does anybody have anything to go before tonight's fire commission?
Eight, 736. Who is that?
Does anybody have anything to bring before the fire commission tonight under public participation? Wait a few more seconds here just in case someone's having technical difficulties. Nobody else? Okay, we'll move on to old business. So discussion and possible action regarding the subcommittee meeting update. Who wants to start us off with this?
Ernie, do you want to start that out? And I'll get
Yes.
the screen share going here.
Yeah, get the screen up. I didn't know if, Mr. Chairman, I thought you were referring to the subcommittee members. So we can go ahead and get started with that.
Sure.
Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
The 8376 is Chief Ponkowskis from Janesville Fire.
Okay.
Glad to join us.
All right.
Okay,
So,
you ready? Are you ready? Are we ready?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so from the last commission meeting we had, we were directed by the commission to meet with the fire department leadership and also work with a subcommittee, which was Teresa and Brian, to look at the two staffing options of basically a standalone fire department for the community of Milton and the city of Milton, or a merger with the city of Janesville. We were directed to make sure we pulled the leadership together from the fire department, along with Dan Nelson, to go through and look at what a projected cost would be, along with some pros and cons for each model. So we have in fact done that. We have met with the subcommittee several times, two times, I believe, and I know that we've met with myself, Dan, Chief Lucas, Chief Maury, and Chief Parker several times, and really had some really good dialogue looking at the future of the fire department. So moving forward on the next slide. So when we started this meeting, or excuse me, this project, we set some objectives to redesign the potential future fire department for the Milton. fire department. And so there were three simple objectives. Any merger or consolidation must maintain all administrative and full-time, regular, or part-time command staff. Enhance both fire departments to provide best practices as budget will allow. Building a system that will meet current and future needs. So those were the three objectives that we established to make sure that when we had our conversation, that an idea or a concept, if it went outside those parameters, we knew that the chances of any particular model that we presented to the commission really probably wasn't a very workable model. Next slide, please.
Okay. So this is where we kind of just disclose some of the assumptions that have been made during when you see the financial figures in a couple slides. We have not consulted with anyone from the city of Janesville administratively, so like their finance director, or anyone in the finance department, to ensure that any kind of cost of recovery related to administration is fully accounted for. Ernie and I came up with assumptions that we think are fairly good. All full-time employees are assumed to have family-related health insurance, dental, that sort of thing. On the consolidation option, the full-time wage rates are based on Janesville's 2021 union contract rates. And depending on when implementation would happen, the rates could be different. And also the cost of a new building has not been factored into this. We're merely looking at ongoing operational costs. And then just a couple housekeeping things before we get too far. I know I said this early, but a lot of you weren't on. Towards the end of this 16 slide presentation, Inga's going to provide a link to the city website. So if folks want to download the PDF of this presentation, they'll be able to, and it will be out there for a very, very long time. So any questions before we start to delve into the scenarios? And Ernie and I and the deputy chiefs plan on trying to tag team this, and we'll try to put logical breakpoints. So if there's questions, we can address them after you've kind of heard the information.
Okay, so what we have is option scenario number one, and this is a kind of a rudimentary whiteboard organizational chart that we developed during our conversations. And so scenario number one is consolidation with Janesville. What you have here is you've got the organizational chart that includes from the top down the chief, and then the next level you have logistics, operations, EMS, training officer, fire marshal, and then administrative support. We currently by creating a consolidation with Milton Fire and Janesville Fire, we would add the staff positions of logistics to support the 6 fire stations in the 3 battalions, an EMS officer, and a training officer, which both organizations share in many aspects and different duties between personnel, and it would increase the efficiency of the command function to support the operations section. As you see the green, things that are circled in green, those are indication of the merger and what the Milton resources would bring into the merger for a consolidated fire department. And that's an additional administrative assistant. That's a logistics support chief. That's an EMS officer and a training officer. And then if you look down below the BCs, the 3 battalions, you have Station 6, which is circled in green. Next.
Okay, so then this is where we look, where those assumptions that I talked about a couple slides ago kind of come in. So currently, the Milton Fire Department collects approximately $250,000 in EMS collections, and under a consolidation, that really wouldn't change on an estimated basis. And a fully burdened 15 full-time firefighter paramedics come at a cost of about $1.3 million. 3 full-time lieutenants would be about $376,000. Our existing battalion chiefs and admin assistant is right around $110,000. And then this next bullet point is a new concept. This is trying to account for contribution towards capital and equipment replacement on an annual basis, so it helps smooth out the ebbs and flows that we currently have. And what we believe as a staff right now to be an appropriate allocation would be about $175,000 a year. Some years we would obviously spend almost none of that, and other years you might utilize 300 or 400 or 500,000, depending on what the piece of equipment is that needs to be replaced. And then we estimated a cost of recovery of about $130,000 to the city of Janesville for utilizing their full fire and EMS management structure, including the battalion chiefs, fire marshal, inspector, and fire chief. And then for the time being, we held the line flat on operating supplies, vehicle maintenance, fuel, etc. at $281,000. That's in the current 2020 budget for the Milton Fire Department. So that's a total operating budget of about $2.4 million, with a required levy of just over $2.1 million because of the offset of EMS collections. I know that is a ton of information that most of you are seeing for the first time, and so I feel like this might be a good stopping point to ask if there's questions about the org chart or this slide.
So this is Ernie again. So I just want to remind everybody that this model is staffing a ambulance and an engine.
It's essentially staffing it the same way Janesville staffs many of their stations. Am I correct in saying that, Ernie?
You are.
Okay.
I have
Sure.
a question. If
Go
I
ahead,
could.
Linda.
I was just wondering, when we're talking about combining the existing battalion chiefs and the administrative assistants and that, is that something that is going to change?
What do you mean by change?
Is that something that, is that structure going to change as we go down, like, say, 2-3 years down the road?
So the structure on the slide, the previous slide, that would be the permanent structure. That would be the structure that would remain very consistent for probably many years.
So what about the paramedics, though? I don't see those on there.
They're at each fire station. And so if you look at the stations, each one of those stations where Dan is moving the mouse represent an ambulance and an engine, with the exception of station 3. But everything else is an ambulance and an engine.
Okay.
And the reason you see 6 people under each shift, and the folks that do this can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's to also cover for leave time. So currently, like, the goal at the Milton station would be to have 5 people always on duty. And the reason you see 6 on here is to cover some of those vacancies for vacation, sick, holidays, etc. Am I correct in saying that, Ernie?
No. What we're looking at right now, this is the organizational chart where it shows BC. Below that, the circles 1 through 6 represent fire stations. Go to the next slide real quick, Nan. So here's the staffing: 15 full-time firefighter paramedics. So with 3 full-time lieutenants, which the lieutenants will probably be paramedics too. And so you will have everybody, for the most part, will be cross-trained as a firefighter and a paramedic at the fire station. So we've definitely filled the gap to make sure that we provide advanced life support services out of this fire station. So Linda, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think the question, Chief, that a lot of people may have on their mind is we've gone through the past 10 years trying to make small changes and increase a little bit at a time of the budget to help accommodate and continue to try to improve the staffing issue. And obviously it's been like putting a Band-Aid on a really big wound, and it hasn't solved the problem, but it's made small fixes for many years. And now we're at that point where it's just not enough to continue with the small increases because the staffing shortage is so significant. So my question is this truly a sustainable model that we can look forward for the next 15 potentially years, or however long this will go for? What is our lifetime of this staffing model as we see it?
So I see this model as a best practice model. I see this model as if other fire departments wanted to consolidate with us and create a countywide fire department, I see this as the model. I see this as a very sustainable model. This is absolutely a very common staffing model across the United States. And this is for many years.
Because at this point now we have a $1.15 million budget for our fire department as it currently stands. So we would be doubling and then some our budget to potentially get full-time staff with no more increase in equipment and no more increase in locations other than in Milton, that is. So we have our one station, and it would act as a subunit of the Janesville Fire Department in this staffing model. And so are we going to be solving the problem that we have as far as lack of coverage in the department, saying that is the full-time people that we have allocated going to be enough to handle what is believed to be the problem?
So I think right now with your current growth, yes. I mean, if you have significant growth at the north side of the fire boundaries up by the lake, let's say for some reason you had 10,000 people living up by the lake and you were responsible for that response, then 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 25 years from now, you would want to consider building an additional fire station and adding to that, or putting another fire station in that area. But as based on our conversations and reviewing the growth, using the maps, the GIS maps, and dialogue with the commission and with a proposed new location for the station, I think your one station will meet your needs for now. But what does future growth look like for the fire district 10 years from now, 20 years from now? I think that's hard to predict. I don't have the data to predict that. I guess you could historically go on what have the past 10 years looked like, and there's been a lot of growth in the Milton area. So it's something to consider. So, John, from that perspective, I can't say this is going to last for 50 years. I can tell you that this is a good model. This is a good presentation as far as the model. But as demographics change, communities grow, industry moves in, we may have to adjust.
I'd like to add that based on the knowledge I have of our comprehensive land use plans or planned areas for development and the expressed interest we've had recently and maybe in the past, my gut feeling is the city and the town in the next 10 to 20 years might grow by 1,000 total. That's just a gut feeling, and it's only my feeling.
Then Brian, I think based on that, I think then this probably is a pretty good model for you folks from a longevity perspective.
And that would be a relatively aggressive development plan based on the interest that's been expressed that I'm aware of.
May I offer something? This is Larry. But based on our growth within the city, recently, the last couple of years, we have a couple residential developments that are accounting for close to 400 or 500 residences. And if you average 3 per person, that's going to be 1,500 people to be served. just in those two developments. So I agree with you, Brian, that there's, probably not extensive growth, but there certainly is going to be growth. Yeah. Thank you for letting me say something.
Okay, so Dan, you want to go to the
Yep.
next slide?
So these next couple slides outline pros and cons of this scenario as we as a small group of staff see this particular scenario. So I'll let Ernie take it from here.
So basically, by the synergistic effect here is what we're looking at when we combine two organizations. You will have a fire department with the resources of $14+ million operating budget. You will have access to 6 fire stations. So if there's a fire in an area, then you'll get the complement that's normally assigned to that still alarm initial response, which is really a big deal. So that's a big pro for Milton right now. You'll have access, or you'll have the full command staff with training, logistics, fire marshal, fire inspector, EMS, operations, what a modern day fire department needs to be really efficient in the function and the administration and execution of the operational responses. This is definitely a stabilizing staffing model, which this is really one of the big reasons why we're here is our call volume, and we cannot sustain our current staffing model with several part or full time and then paid on call and paid on premise. And so you will definitely fix that. There's a career advancement for existing membership, which can be a draw to attract some really good, strong, young talent. Next slide, please. The economies of scale is big here. We can look at supplies and training and services and mechanical services and fleet services. We can bid, more. The more you bid, the more pieces of, like for instance, turnout gear, the cheaper it is. So the same goes for radios. Virtually a lot of services and supplies. The bigger we are, the better pricing we can get per unit. That's a big deal. And then an enhanced backup fleet. So if we would utilize each other's backup fleet, we would have a capability, but there may be moving toward the future an opportunity to create a reserve fleet among not only Milton and Janesville, but also a couple of other fire agencies in the county. So you really take advantage of, instead of a fire department that says, I need 3 backup engines and 4 backup ambulances, and everybody has to keep their backup, we would come together and say, on any given day, what's the maximum we would be in a backup engine? Is it 2? Is it 3? And instead of us maintaining that full fleet by ourselves, we could share that responsibility to maintain a backup fleet. So you're really taking advantage of a bigger operation, bringing together that economy of scale for a reserve fleet. Handling of larger incidents. Right now, if there's a large incident in the Milton fire area, it does heavily rely on mutual aid, and you would absolutely have access to more fire stations on a faster response time. Obviously, though, if it's a huge incident, as Janesville and Milton and everybody in the county, we still do rely on mutual aid. Once again, I just hit on increased capability to respond to multiple calls, which we know that's been kind of a problem for us at Milton, that we're getting calls stacked on each other and it's difficult to cover those calls. And then the big one for me is a better systems approach. We have 2 systems of management, in a sense, 2 philosophies of management, 2 training programs, and 2 HR systems. And I think pulling together and creating one system approach to running a modern day fire department will greatly increase efficiencies and enhance service to not only our citizens, but our internal customers and our employees, and just an overall improved level of service. Next. So here are the cons. There will definitely be a perceived, and I would, anybody can jump in from the command staff, perceived loss of identity for the Milton Fire Department by staff and community. I know that's a concern. Limited control on resources. So, the big fire department would be running the calls and identifying resources. We would, if we needed to move a truck for a move up, we would do that. But that door swings both ways. There could be a perception of tax dollars leaving the community when in actuality they're still in the community, but there could be a perception of that. An increased loss of volunteerism for the fire department. But that's currently eroding as we see across the United States. And then the bottom fact is change is always difficult. So there might be trust issues and perception issues. And so we would have to work really hard to over communicate and to listen to everybody's needs and concerns and aspirations as far as moving forward. Next.
So before we go, because the next slide is another scenario as a standalone department. Are there any questions, or do the deputy chiefs want to chime in on anything that we talked about with this scenario before we kind of move ahead?
Okay. Let's move forward. Scenario 2, the standalone fire department. So what we have here is, once again, our whiteboard drawing of the organization and what it would look like. So you have the chief, you have an administrative assistant, and then we felt through conversation we would have to add a part-time administrative assistant to support the battalion chiefs, which we don't call them battalion chiefs. If you look down below the ops box, you see a C. That's a captain. So really they're the battalion chief, but their rank is captain. And if you see that each one of those captains share a duty with not only responding to calls and being operational ready, but they would have an administrative function too. And that is, if you look at A shift, that's EMS, B shift is training, and C shift would be fire inspections in the Prevention Bureau. I can tell you from experience, when you start sharing administrative duties with operational people, it is very difficult. Operations does take precedence because calls come in and administrative detail may be not as big of a priority. So it is definitely a significant impact on those employees in those positions. And that's why we added the part-time administrative assistant to help with paperwork to support the operational capacity of the 3 captains. So below the C, where it says C, below the captains, you have an LSV, which means life support vehicle, which is an ambulance. And there's 2 people staffed on that. And then you have an engine, which you would have 2 people. And what you're seeing is a representation of all 3 shifts, shift A, shift B, shift C. So you can tell it's a total of 18 people. You can tell that it's a lesser command staff and shares more duties. And then once again, you instead of 6 fire stations, you have a fire station. Next.
So here's where we put together our best estimate on the costs. And it's important to note that these, similar to scenario 1, these costs also include full-time benefits and that sort of thing. And it's a different scale. We did not use the Janesville union contract verbatim when determining these wages and salaries. But once again, under this scenario, we don't foresee collections for our own standalone department being different than they are now, of approximately $250,000. 15 full-time firefighter paramedics are just over 1.2 million. Three full-time captains would be about 325,000. 3 full-time lieutenants, 283. One 1.5 FTE admin assistants, estimated at 67,000. Then your fire chief and deputy chief are at 237. And then we still put together an annual contribution for capital and equipment to try to level that out, so we eliminate some of the ebbs and flows. And for the time being, we held the line on operational supplies, vehicle maintenance, fuel, that sort of thing. And then we have an estimated plug number for accounting, payroll, HR type services of 115,000. So this has a total operating budget of about 2.7 million with a required tax levy of just under 2.5 million. So before we move on to the pros and cons, are there any questions on the organizational structure or these costs?
Could you flip back to scenario 1 just so that we can kind of see the, okay.
Some of the differences in what you're seeing too is the health insurance that the city has is slightly less expensive than what Janesville has. So that's accounting for some of the difference in the 15 full-time firefighter, paramedics, and some of those other line items.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I do have a question. So in a standalone station, though, we are running higher levels of equipment. We have more equipment than we would in a station that would be a substation. Is that correct?
I would think that you would maintain the fleet that you have right now. You could always examine that. You could, if the commission chose to just run an ambulance and an engine and a tender and a truck and probably a boat. But you've got to have a reserve fleet too. So you probably are looking at the current level of equipment you have now to maintain that.
Any other questions before we move on to the pros and cons of this scenario?
Okay, pros. Complete control of fire resources. So, it's your fire department. So it's a standalone operation and exclusive use of your equipment. You would maintain the exclusive identity of the Milton Fire Department. You would have your own command staff. And overall, you definitely would improve your level of service because, next slide, Dan. Because you have definitely created a stable staffing pattern, as you see on bullet 3. Full-time personnel would work in the community, and more full-time career opportunities for existing membership. That's the second bullet. I didn't mean to jump around. And then back to the third bullet, the stable staffing pattern, which is the reason why we're looking at this. And then you could have the ability to create your own labor agreement that could create better flexibility and utilization of your part-time employees, paid on premises, and or volunteer staffing. Here's some cons. You're definitely going to have a limited economy of scale. You'll have your own exclusive management structure that you'll have in a smaller scale. You will pay probably we just don't have the ability to draw in bigger bids and decrease our unit pricing. So harder to buy a bulk purchase. Obviously you can buy it, but you're not going to have the cost savings. You're still creating 2 fire systems. So, there's a great opportunity to create a merger to create one system. So what we're doing is we're still building 2 different fire systems, and in a sense, a duplication of effort. Continued reliance on mutual aid, more so on a very regular basis versus a large significant incident or a large working fire. And it's harder to utilize equipment if a piece is unavailable. Higher cost share. potentially to the townships, and more shared duties in management roles. And I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure you can talk to Janesville battalion chiefs and captains, that the administrative duties that they do, it is difficult. So that's going to pull on the operational capability of your captains and potentially your lieutenants. And then a potential cost share for mutual aid calls, which what that means is, right now we enjoy our shared services agreement, and so we send fire trucks back and forth to Milton and Janesville. However, if the community grew and I, as chief at Janesville, found that Milton fire trucks were coming to the city of Janesville, say 50 times a year, and this is an extreme example, and we were sending an engine for mutual aid and or to fill in on a call, 200 times, then that's disproportionate, and I would have to try to gain some of that cost recovery, that share back, because I don't think it's real reciprocating, because it's a lot, we're responding up there a lot more, and I want to make sure and protect the interest of the Janesville Fire Department and the citizens. Okay, next. I think that's it.
Yeah, then we kind of get into how we do things currently. Are there any questions before we jump to like what this might mean in terms of referendums and current allocations and next steps and that kind of stuff?
May I ask a question, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Chief, how difficult is it, or how much of a challenge is it to find individuals to fill those situations where they have the dual role in terms of the lieutenants and the captain? If I can ask that question, if you went with an independent department again, how difficult would it be to find individuals who want to share those responsibilities in their job?
Sir, I don't think it would be really difficult. I mean, I think when you would promote people up, or you would initially hire those positions, it would be in their job description, and so they would have full transparency and knowledge that that's an expectation. I don't think it would be a problem. I know it's not very efficient, and it will eventually strain the organization, and you will lose some efficiencies on that.
Dan, I know that you said on the consolidated scenario that salaries were based on the 21 Janesville contract.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of scenario 2, how comparable are the salaries that are factored in?
I think they're fairly comparable. I think I think the deputy chiefs and Ernie can help me out a little bit. It was mainly in the more management, lieutenant, fire chief roles where the salaries we differed them slightly. I don't recall exactly the exact salary we had for a fire chief on a standalone, but I believe it was in the upper 80s or low 90s, similar to like what the police chief in the city of Milton gets. And then for the deputy chief, we kind of followed that same pay scale of what our deputy police chief gets. And so, perhaps Ernie or the deputy chiefs could better speak to what that means in terms of a knowledge base that we would be receiving in those types of roles. And I believe we had, I think the captains and the lieutenants were fairly comparable. If any of the other folks can kind of help me out.
Yeah, Dan, I think there was a significant decrease in a comparable from a lieutenant and captain in the line, and I don't recall exactly what we came up with. I don't have my note, that particular set of notes with me, but I think it's like a line firefighter paramedic was roughly $15 to $16, which was about $2 less than an hour than a starting Janesville firefighter paramedic. I think the lieutenants and officers' wages were fairly much less than the Janesville. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I know
Yeah, I'd have to look at the spreadsheet to get
yeah,
the.
yeah.
One of the reasons that I raised it is, concern of if there is a standalone Milton Fire Department, we kind of don't want it to be the farm team for the Janesville Fire Department. We're still going to be the same distance away from Janesville. We got two professional fire departments, full-time professional fire departments. If the salary differential is significant, there's going to be a tendency for people to kind of cycle through Milton until the job opens in Janesville. That kind of thing. And so having salaries fairly comparable, even in a standalone model, probably does make some sense.
And you also have to consider too the opportunity. A lot of, not all, but a lot of firefighters coming into the field like to work for larger fire departments because there's more opportunity and they're busier, and it's more of an all hazards approach. And so you would also be looking at that challenge too, to maintain employees to get them to stay with that longevity along with your wages.
Not to disagree with that statement, but at the same time, it's a different kind of fire department. So, I mean, you can't anticipate that a one-station fire department is going to offer the same employment opportunities as a station that has multiple subunits to it. So, I mean, it's no different than working at a large store, which can pay you maybe a little higher wage because the income of that facility is more, versus a smaller company that can't afford to pay a higher wage. So, I mean, we can't be the same price as a larger entity when the tax revenues are not the same. So, I mean, there's that as well as, the type of work that we're doing is not as high call volume as Janesville. So, granted, they're running more stations to disperse that volume, but at the same time, because the workload is not the same, you can't also expect the pay to be equivalently the same. I understand what you're saying about maybe people starting in Milton and working a few years, then as a employment opportunity moves forward in Janesville, we might be more of a stepping stone, as we have been for the past many years. But having full-time employment is definitely the first step to having consistent employment. And you're going to find people, if the work environment is good on a smaller level, because it's smaller level management is typically easier going than larger level management in a general sense. I would expect to see higher retention compared to what we have now.
I'm not suggesting that salaries and wages would need to be tied directly. I'm just saying that there can't be a huge differential between the two. I understand what you're saying, John. I think that's a valid kind of a point. But at the same time, we don't want to get ourselves into a situation where we underestimate scenario 2, and then 3 years into it find that we're not retaining people. That we've got this churn and that we've got vacancies, which is part of the reason that we're considering change in the first place.
And I don't know if Chris or Pete or Jeremy want to chime in, because I know they were in the room when we were creating these. I feel like we tried to find a happy medium between those two, because they are lower than Janesville's, but this is just me speaking. I didn't think that they were substantially lower, but maybe I'm wrong. Because I don't do this for a living in terms of the actual, work that the folks in the fire department do. So I don't know if any of those folks want to speak up to some of this wage discussion.
Dan, do you have the spreadsheet on your computer at home?
Yeah.
You can just reference that really quick, and we could probably provide some clarity there. Just compare the wages really quick.
Yeah, let me just get connected here. I just gotta get connected to the network.
While you guys are working on that, do you mind if I ask a question about mutual aid?
No, ma'am, please, please.
So the topic, if I understand you correctly, that you had said that mutual aid may be difficult in a standalone system because you needed to protect Janesville, and I understand that point. Are we not, as Milton, providing mutual aid out to outlying, like are we still going to Edgerton as we had in past years? I thought it was fairly consistently that we were providing mutual aid kind of around our entire area.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. We are still actively, and we participate in in the mutual aid systems in the area. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think, yeah, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
No, and that's, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think if I understand correctly, at least years ago, that it is an actual agreement that we will provide it. It's kind of like you don't get to question it. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, please correct me.
No, you can pass on mutual aid. You can in the MABUS mutual aid system, if you're requested for service, you can pass, and that does happen across the county, across the state. Fire departments do pass on a fairly regular basis, depending on the time of day and if they have people to respond to the call.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Very common. Very common.
The sense that I've gotten in the recent past is in a large crisis, everybody's willing to sacrifice and try to provide mutual aid as much as possible. But on a smaller scale call, if a station seems to be, if they feel that they're going to be stressed by providing mutual aid, they generally deny it. And that's just a sense that I've gotten.
Brian, your sense is I think, could be accurate, right? Like I said, it just depends on time of call and the nature of call, and is there staffing available and stuff like that.
All right, I found the spreadsheet, so I'm gonna bring it over here. There's a lot of gory detail in here, but so under the merging scenario, these are the Janesville rates for lieutenants, and then the starting wage is $17 an hour for the full-time paramedic firefighter. And then in the standalone, we have lieutenants at $20. I think we had also said that there was going to be a different expectation of work level between what Janesville and Milton do, or what's expected out of a lieutenant. And then we have our captains at like $24 an hour. I don't have the Janesville ones because that was all part of the merge. That was all part of the merge of management structure. I don't know if does that help you, Ernie? Or is that something we would want to bring back to this?
No, I think it answers the commission question. So you can see where the starting line is 17 each, which is good. I thought it was 15. I apologize to the commission. And then but you do have a significant difference in lieutenant's pay from 20 to then again $27.50. So you've got some variance in wages. I guess it just depends on what level you're looking at, but the entry level I think is the most important level when you hire into a fire department.
So this is that management structure that we'd be paying, and the comparable title in Janesville, this is $27.50. We got it at 20, and then the captains are all just part of that blended rate under the consolidation. So, and then there's the fire chief at 90 and the deputy chief at 80. So, does that help answer? I forgot who asked that question, but does that help clarify?
it helps me a lot. That's terrific.
Any other questions on this before I just close it up? All right. So if there are any questions right now on the two scenarios, we'll go on to, and this shouldn't be a surprise by anyone on this at this meeting, but currently the city and town are 50% owners and contributors for capital costs, and then as we know from about 5-6 years ago, cost overruns are also split 50-50. And then there are fixed annual contracts with the town of Harmony, Johnstown, Lima, and Koshkonong. And obviously, as we've alluded to, there are significant increased costs with this scenario. So I know the next question would be, what are the levy limit implications on this? And this is straight from Wisconsin statutes for townships of less than 3,000. So this would be our 3 contracted towns of Lima, Johnstown, and Harmony. Wouldn't necessarily have to do a referendum, as it could any kind of levy increase could occur at the annual town meeting or a special town meeting. And when I contacted the Department of Revenue, depending on when we would be implementing any kind of cost increase, it looks like the town of Milton is going to be pushing over 3,000 here based on the 2020 population estimates. So that brings us to, what does a referendum look like if you have more than 3,000 residents? So in odd years like we would be in next year, there's statutory limit or statutory deadlines of ballot language getting approval. I believe it's at the state level or with the elections commission, or some sort of approval besides at the local level. It has to happen 70 days prior to the election. So if we were to put it on the April election, the ballot language would need to be approved by mid-January. Or we could hold a special referendum at any point during the year. But basically the language would need to be approved no later than 70 days prior to the election, or for easy math, 3 months prior. And then in even years, like we're in this year, you could have the referendum on an April, August, or November election, and then you can see the respective deadlines, and you start counting the calendar backwards, or you'd be looking at mid-May or mid-January, late May, or mid-September for ballot language to be approved. Are there any questions on that? That's all housekeeping, logistic type things. Inga, if you want to send out the link to the thing, we're going to be hitting the last slide. Ernie, do you want to take this? Ernie, you still there?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just, my fingers are, they're just, I don't know what's going on. It's just technology. My apologies. So action steps. So, going forward, what does going forward look? These are very broad. So to choose a scenario, is it option 1 or option 2? And then based on your choice, your second bullet would be either hire your full-time fire chief, or you would, depending on the option, you would merge the command staff and start to plan for consolidation. The next step is plan and build a fire station based on GIS data in the Hilltop Drive location in that area, because regardless of what option you pick, you still need to start working towards your fire station. The next step is explore other cost sharing methodologies for capital and or operations. So start looking at really doing the drill down, right? With depending on what scenario you went with, if it was to merge with Janesville, then there would have to be, we would have to engage with the city of Janesville to really start looking at the cost share for capital and operations and really button that down really well. Next step would be prepare for a referendum in 2021. And if passage of referendum, hire staff. And then the final step is execute standalone operation or consolidation. I know this is this really kind of minimalizes the heavy lift here, but that's the 40,000 foot view on what we would want to do as we move forward.
And I think the other point on bullet point 4 about cost sharing methodologies, at some point we'd probably want to bring our contracted townships into that conversation too.
Yep.
Because we're obviously providing a much greater service than what we are doing now. And so that may or may not change the methodologies on the cost sharing and their contract prices really, but with some sort of methodology behind it. Because I think we can all agree no one really knows what methodology started with the contracted amounts. And then as we know over the past several years, it's just been small incremental increases, even as the department has provided higher levels of services. But that's a decision for this body and to make, to determine if the current allocations are appropriate with the services that are provided. So that's the end of the PowerPoint slide as we have it. I guess the first question I would ask the commission is, did we meet the expectations of what was kind of expected and what we were tasked with doing? Did we miss anything, or does anyone want to see any other, I don't know.
I have a question. In the event that we were to merger with Janesville, does the fire station location change Chief Roads based on what Janesville might be looking at also?
No, ma'am. We would still need to put that fire station in the area of Hilltop Drive.
Okay.
Chief, and I guess between Mark Freitag and Chief here. So it had been brought up in a few conversations. I think it's been brought up a couple times, but hasn't really been explored, is the opportunity for representation for each municipality in the form of a fire district, where it's a management of resources, different style of merger consolidation, where every party has an equal stake in the district, and resources are allocated based upon those representations of needs. So I guess I ask between the two of you, maybe more so Mark at this time, has Janesville considered maybe that type of consolidation and exploring that with us?
Yeah, Commissioner Jennings, thanks for the opportunity to, say a few words tonight, and certainly to the commission for allowing me to listen in. I would tell you that I'm seeing these slides for the first time tonight, just like you are, and I know that this discussion has been going on between Chief Roads and the commission as to where do you go as you move forward. I would tell you that my understanding from our city attorney is that a fire district is not necessarily currently authorized by state statutes in that true sense of a fire district being a separate taxing jurisdiction. However, through a series of shared service agreements between communities, we can create the essence of a district without establishing a separate taxing jurisdiction. So I think that the answer to your question is yes, but I would tell you that this is your decision. I'm not trying to push. I'm not trying to empire build. We're not trying to take away any of Milton's identity, as Chief has commented to throughout the briefing. But what I would tell you is I certainly appreciate the Commission's desire to maintain or improve the effective delivery of services, both fire and EMS, to your communities and to your residents, while doing so as efficiently as possible. And I think that's what we're all trying to achieve inside our communities. It's been very interesting to listen to the questions and to hear Chief's and Dan's presentation. Frankly, as Chief mentioned up front, it would, if you do choose to take or to further explore the consolidation idea, I think that, the City of Janesville staff is certainly, more than capable and willing to, do a deep dive and try and get several layers deep into this to make sure this is a good decision for the City of Janesville and certainly for the Milton Fire Commission. I would also share with you that, one of my major concerns is that, the revenue streams for municipalities, for townships, continue to, be limited at the state level. It becomes more and more challenging each and every year as we try and become creative with how we can maintain that level of service, whatever that be, whether it's police, fire, assessments, housing programs, etc., how we can maintain that level of service when, frankly, the cost of doing business is outpacing our ability to increase revenues. And so I am becoming more and more a believer that communities cooperating together through shared services agreements, and in this case, some kind of potentially consolidation are really the way that communities are going to be able to continue to deliver those effective services to their residents and community members, and do so as efficiently as possible. We started this several years ago with our shared services with the Milton Fire Commission, and I think it's been a great partnership. The question is it time to to step back or to find out what that next evolution looks like? I will tell you, one of the things I'm most impressed with Chief Rhodes is he brings a lot of experience in communities cooperating together from the St. Louis area, and he's already brought forward ABI and essentially a much better way to respond based upon assets as they're distributed across the county for fire and emergency issues. Currently he's got conversations going on with fire chiefs across the county about, does it make sense for all of us to maintain these very large, cumbersome reserve fleets of aging vehicles that require a lot of maintenance, but we only use them internally. We don't share them necessarily outside of our internal organizations. Frankly, we've talked at length about, this idea of, perhaps consolidating the Janesville Fire Department with the Milton Fire Department, and what that might look like. I guess my message to you is that the City of Janesville remains, certainly a community partner. We're happy to dive into this and look at it in some more detail to make sure that, certainly it works for the City of Janesville, but also, works for the town and the city of Milton. And so I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has, but I think it's, again, it's truly your decision. You've got two very viable options here, and you need to do what's right for your communities. And no matter how that works out, the City of Janesville remains your partner, and we're happy to continue the conversation if that's what you want to do.
I think, John, just to follow up with your question, I think right now we did discuss that briefly in our subcommittee meetings, but it is a wonderful idea, but to focus primarily on working to consolidate Milton and Janesville and perhaps model the success of working together so that other communities in our area could see if it's working well, and if not, we can tweak it. We can look at what we need to do to work together successfully, and if we are able to do so, eventually see that other communities may be interested in our area to join us in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, if I could just comment, I've had conversations, strategic kind of big picture conversations with City Manager Luther down in Beloit, and she's had conversations with, her neighboring communities about, bringing together services and what that might look like. Certainly we've got the Milton and Janesville conversation going, but, I think that in the future you could see Rock County North, Rock County South, and maybe, in the further future, a consolidation, across Rock County, if it makes sense. And again, the question is does it make sense for the partner communities? But, as I said, I think this is the way of the future because revenue streams are not keeping pace with inflation. And so we're going to have to make some adjustments.
So does anybody have any questions that they want to ask at this time that we can address at this with these people here? So we have Mark and Dan and Chief.
I would just like to say thank you, Mark, for joining the meeting and sharing this with us. This, as you can imagine, has not been an easy decision for us, the commission, or the people working in the department. And so I know I was just recently looking, it was actually 2017 that we started this conversation.
Mhm.
And I totally agree. I totally agree that this is the way of the future. There's the money isn't there, and our responsibility is to look out for our taxpayers. And I think that we all know that they want public safety. So I just wanted to thank you for coming.
Yep. Well, it was a pleasure being here. I'll let you guys continue with your meeting tonight. And, obviously, if you got any things for me, please pass them through Chief Rhodes. But best of luck in your decision making. I know you've got a tough one in front of you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I would thank Ernie and Dan, as well as Chris, Pete, and Jeremy for meeting several times and putting together all of this information. It's been a lot of information gathering, as well as, trying to picture in their heads what each of these would look like, and trying to put it together so that we could perceive what these two types of programs would look like so that we can make some decisions. So that's been a lot. Thank you.
You are very welcome. We've enjoyed to look at it. It's been energizing. And I think, we've got a really good grasp on what the future would look like, whatever direction the commission should choose.
Okay.
I agree. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Does the commission want us to, looking at this fourth bullet point that's on this slide, does the commission want us to bring back what some cost sharing method, or at least a cost sharing methodology would look like for the two scenarios to better help you potentially choose a scenario that we could start to really dig deeper into?
I think what we had talked about at one time was that once we brought it here, the next step would be to get a joint meeting between the city council and the township board. And perhaps that information would be one thing to bring to that group. But we need to keep moving along in this process. Otherwise, we tend to get stuck and we don't move. I'm wondering how other people feel. Are we ready now to move to that level, to continue this discussion and to have this presentation done with our peers?
Well, I would absolutely agree with that, Teresa. At the same time, I think it would be most helpful for us, as Dan has offered, and thank you for that offer, Dan, to get that information out to the entities ahead of time so that we can kind of digest it prior to meeting together. The other question I guess I have is, I just need a refresher on our outlying towns that we have contracts with, and whether they have access to, I know at least 2 of them already have services contracted through other departments, I believe. And not that this is going to be a huge big issue, but if I'm understanding correctly, Dan, you kind of alluded to the fact that this can be a significant cost jump for those other municipalities, and just trying to determine if we're going to be able to offer those services for them, or whether they're going to contract with other departments. And not that it matters. I guess I just need to know what that looks like for us.
Right. And, I think we need to, right now, I can tell you, like, what the town and Chief Rhodes and any of the deputy chiefs can chime in. For the town of Harmony, we cover about 80% of their parcels. For the town of Lima, it's about 40%. Koshkanon is 5%, and the town of Johnstown is about 74%. And I believe the city of Janesville probably covers the other 20% of Harmony. And then I don't know who covers the remaining portions of Lima, Koshkanon, and Johnstown. But, as I alluded to on the one slide about referendum and that sort of thing, Lima, Johnstown, and Harmony wouldn't actually have to go the referendum route because their populations are well below 3,000. But I think that's where us doing a cost methodology could provide some insight as to what that could look like for those townships, and also what it means for the city and the town of Milton. And obviously there's lots of different ways that you could, split costs. And not to say, at the next meeting, whenever that might be, the methodology that we present doesn't have to necessarily be the end all be all, but it'll just be a methodology.
I guess I would be in favor of us taking a look at the cost sharing in a little more detail prior to a meeting with the larger meeting. I think that's good information for us to have, and figure the cost implications for the various communities before we take that next step. I do agree we need to keep it moving. I'm not trying to delay it all, but the cost implications are really significant here. They're pretty big numbers and pretty big jumps.
If we planned to meet to try to use our August meeting as a joint meeting, could we try to schedule an additional meeting specifically for that, Bill?
I'd certainly be willing to do that. Let me toss in my thanks as well. The presentation has been really, really very, very helpful. I think it moves us to a level that we haven't been at before. So I'd be all in for having an extra meeting scheduled to take a look at this as soon as the figures would be available.
Does that give you time, Dan, to put that together?
Ernie and I were actually talking about this prior to everyone jumping on. If we wanted, and I don't think I know my schedule's open, but if we wanted to do a meeting even prior to August, if we wanted to look at, I think it's the 29th of July, 2 weeks from today, we could probably have numbers put together because a lot of the base work is already been done. And so I don't think it would take a lot of effort and a lot of time for the four of us to put something like that together.
So meeting with you guys on the 29th and then schedule a joint meeting or try to on the 19th of August.
Yeah, or if we wanted to just have a commission meeting on the 29th of July to go over the information and then do a joint meeting 2-3 weeks, or I guess it'd be 3 weeks later.
The commission meeting on the 29th would be my preference. I think that would be great.
Could we look to the 30th? I'm sorry, the 29th I'm unavailable.
30th would be Thursday, the 30th of July.
How does that work for everyone?
It's okay with me.
Should be
Okay
fine.
with me.
Brian, not hearing anything? Your voice isn't on, Brian.
There you go. Try. There you go.
You
Go ahead,
can meet, Brian?
There he is.
Still haven't heard you.
I think he's having some troubles.
One finger means yes, you can meet. 2 fingers means no.
Could use chat as well.
And watch those fingers. We're not getting it.
I'm gonna try muting him and then
Okay.
where'd you go? Dan, did you just stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, I didn't know if that would help.
Yeah, now I see people that haven't been here. Hi,
I just saw
Jeremy.
your message to me, Inga.
Okay.
So where did Brian go now?
He's frozen in time.
He's still on my screen here, but I think he's lost all sound.
Can he hear us?
I don't see him any.
I think his internet connection might have.
Yeah.
He doesn't know we've been talking about him for the last 40 minutes?
Got that robotic look.
Yeah.
Well, we can probably kindle with Brian a little later and via email. Or we
Okay,
can-
so let's tentatively plan it for the 30th at 7 p.m.
Yep, that works for you, Jenny. Would you be available that day?
July 30th at 7 p.m. for a commission. Yep.
Okay.
All right, let's plan that. And it'll be a fairly simple agenda. It'll just have the item of business that we're going to be tending to that day, since we're going to have another regularly scheduled meeting with our joint bodies handling our major item of business in August. I'd say that would be enough time for us to be able to come up with a good plan of discussing this openly and maybe taking this PowerPoint that was created and maybe having kind of a similar presentation between both bodies and explaining our options and maybe exploring a few of those options to show some of those viable qualities, like it was saying with the pros and cons. I think that would be best. Any other
Al or
comments?
Inga, can you look into whether or not we could hold a joint meeting on the 19th then with the township and the city? And let us know.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure
so
if I
you-
commented.
19th
You
of
would-
August?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd be looking to see if we could host one at City Hall or via Zoom, depending on where we're at in
Yeah.
the world at that point. Yeah,
Right.
that's not a problem.
Okay. And we'll go from there. We'll wait. Hopefully the township can too. And I'm assuming somebody from like Dan and the chief and the three of you guys hopefully can be there. Chris and Jeremy and Pete and anyone else that wants to.
Yeah, I can be there.
Okay.
So
All
we
right.
just have to keep into consideration if there are social distancing standards that still are going to be enforced. Be mindful of that. If the accommodations become disproportionate to the number of people that will plan on attending, either we'll have to limit the attendance or we'll have to change the venue. So just be aware of that situation in case we do have a significant amount of interest in attending this meeting. So I can see already that this may be, since it's a very monumental occasion, taking two municipal governments and putting them in one room to discuss this matter, it's probably going to have some traffic and maybe some press. So let's just be prepared for that
Yeah.
possibility.
And that's what I was going to suggest, John, is worst case scenario, if you want to call it worst case scenario, we find a venue that can accommodate
Right.
a group of that size. I think we have options, I guess is my point.
Yep.
I just have a question then. As far as the townships go, are we thinking that we will bring this information to the township in August? Or will we wait until September to bring that information?
So I don't think Brian is on right now, is he? If he is, he probably can't hear us. But it would be my intention to bring this, put this on an item for the town. That would be the 13th of August. So we could, prior to discuss this and maybe take some of the preliminary information that's been given to us and stage it for the next meeting. Excuse me, I'm in July. Let me go to my next date here.
I'm sorry, just quick. Brian, can you hear us now?
Yeah, he's answering you.
I kind of hear him a little bit, but there's something going on with the microphone, I think.
Good.
But
I tried coming back in, but my microphone is not working well.
Oh, his
Okay.
internet's doing, yeah, okay.
Internet.
Yeah. So the 10th is the meeting for August right now. That's our projected time to meet is second Monday of August. So yeah, that puts us at a full week prior to the 19th meeting. So that should be fine. I'll run it past Brian just to make sure that we can get that on the agenda. It shouldn't be an issue.
What
And
about the other towns?
this
Oh,
city
moving.
try to
City has done
review
this.
it on the meeting on the 4th if we have a chance.
And Linda, were you saying you'd like to try to invite the other municipalities, the contracted municipalities, to listen in on the discussions and maybe provide input? Is that what you were saying?
Well, I'm just wondering when we will talk to them about the information that we're going to have from our joint meeting.
Right. And that's a good question. That might be September. I guess that would probably fall into the best play after each municipality discusses it fully and comes up with kind of a game plan and then presents that game plan to the contracted services that we provide. What are the other, Linda? Go ahead.
I'm a little concerned about, these the smaller townships and their budgeting.
Mhm.
Even running into September might be a little bit difficult unless we could do it early.
Right.
Well, the information that I would plan on bringing forth 15 days from now would have at least a methodology of cost sharing, which would include the 4 contracted townships. So, I mean, that information will essentially be out there after that meeting.
Sure.
And I can't imagine the presentation at a joint city council and town board meeting 3 weeks later changing dramatically unless this body wants to explore other cost sharing methodologies. So I'll just leave it at that. So that information is going to be out there 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I plan on just taking this presentation and adding more slides to it. So that way it's just a more enhanced presentation with just more information.
I'm sure, Linda, too, that the townships will start calling the fire department because their contracts are up at the end of this year. It was a 2-year contract for 19 and 20.
Okay.
So they don't start knowing what's going on. They start calling to see if we've talked about anything at a meeting. So they know if their price will increase or not.
Sure.
Okay.
So I think that would be appropriate to, once this information becomes available about potential contracts, what the costs would be implicit of a new system, that be sent to the corresponding municipalities as a reference, and to be participating in those conversations going forward, just as awareness more so. And then if they do have concerns, that they could address them either written or in person, to make sure that their voice is being heard, because they are providing some portion of our budget to help fund the fire department, and we are providing that service to them.
I think Brian is trying to call in.
There you go.
Yes, this is Brian.
Okay, we can hear you.
I had to call in. My audio is terrible here, so.
So, Brian, have you heard us since we've been talking for the past 10 minutes?
Most of it, pieces of it.
So the biggest thing that we're asking right now is if it will work between the municipalities to meet on August 19th, and for the commission to meet prior to that on the 30th of July to discuss the potential change in the contracts costs associated with a change in staffing model.
We rescheduled our town board meeting for August, I believe, to Monday the 17th.
Oh, that's right, we did. I remember that now. Okay.
Not that that makes a difference in this discussion with these dates, but that's our next scheduled town board.
That would still be fine. I would gather. It still gives us time to discuss it on the town board level, put it as an item on the agenda, and then a few days later meet as a full body board with the city council as their full body, and have true discussions about what these discussions regarding the fire department look like in consolidation or a standalone station. So I would say as long as everyone is okay with it, we can reach out to our individual municipalities, ensure that that reaches an agreement for everyone's schedule, and kind of go forward and plan those 2 dates.
Do we want to invite the contracted townships to the commission meeting on the 30th of July, or do we want to wait?
I believe that would be an appropriate time, since that is relevant information specifically to them. Any other comments from anyone else?
I mean, they're more than welcome to come. I think it's just a courtesy to say this is what's going to be discussed at that meeting. If they want to, they can.
Absolutely.
Just so they aren't first reading about it in the paper is what I'm trying to prevent.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think that's a fair thing, and I can reach out to the chairs of each contracted municipality.
Thank you, John.
So
Yep.
the purpose of the July 30th meeting then is to discuss what?
To look at
Cost
a cost methodology.
Okay.
So what I was saying when you were having technical issues, Brian, is we would it would essentially be this presentation, but beefed up with a cost sharing scenario. So it'd be the same presentation, just more slides.
Okay.
I think I know the answer to this, but let me ask the question. I'm assuming that our conversation is going to be a conversation limited pretty much to operations, that we're not talking about the facility being bundled into this. Facility was mentioned in the PowerPoint, but only in terms of those steps to the future. I think it is going to be a question that the public raises. It's sort of like there will be two shoes dropping. The first one is the operational shoe, and then later on there's a facility shoe that will be dropping. But I think we need to focus right now on the operational portion, and then move to the facility thing once we figure that out.
And if Ernie, Jeremy, Pete, or Chris want to chime in, I would imagine, because this presentation was like 99.8% probably focused on operations, and then just the annual capital allocation for equipment and vehicles. We would continue to just focus in on that at this point for that conversation. But if others have different thoughts, please speak up, or if I'm missing something.
The contract towns, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
I think that's a good place to start.
Okay.
The contract towns will certainly have questions about the operations side of it and how that might affect them contemplating this whole operations. So the operating part, the building and whatnot, is going to be a large unknown part for the contract towns to comprehend the whole picture.
Do you have anything you want to add, Chief Rhodes?
No, I think you're tracking where you need to be.
Okay.
Can I offer something? I think it's important to remember that the contract services have to be looked at, certainly, but the decision-making still falls back to the commission and the city of Milton and the town of Milton. You know what I mean? When you contract services, you're always under the influence of the people you're contracting with in terms of cost. So regardless of what scenario we go with, there's going to be some cost sharing or some cost increases, probably on the part of the 4 towns that are contracted.
Oh, absolutely. Without question, what I'm just kind of pointing out, I guess, that they're definitely going to raise that as a total unknown for them from the capital side of it.
Mhm. Well, and two, the income that is received is not necessarily proportionate to the income that is contributed by each municipality from the city and the town is concerned, but it still has a substantial effect upon the overall cost of the operations of the department. You know, as we add all of these different municipalities up in their contribution, making sure that that's nothing to sneeze at when we're talking, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So making sure that we are respective to including that, either they're going to be included in the discussions going forward and under the impression that they're going to continue with that service and we can continue on that anticipation of revenue, or we're going to have to look for either alternative means of revenue if they're not interested in pursuing the same goals and objectives as set forth by the commission.
Agreed.
So going forward, is there any other discussion on this item before kind of wrap up this item?
As far as the timeline, as far as budgeting goes, we should kind of have somewhat of a deadline as far as this, 2022, 2023, so people kind of have that in mind. I don't see us pulling this off next year. I don't know how you folks feel about that.
I guess this will come up a little bit in the meeting between each municipality when we have our
You
group
kind of
conversation.
cut out. I didn't hear what you said, Jeremy.
I said for budgeting purposes, well, we kind of need to maybe come up with a soft deadline, either as far as like 2022, 2023 for these smaller municipalities so they can prepare for it.
Yeah.
I think logistically, the earliest we could implement this, well, I guess there's no, I think, the earliest we could implement this would be 2022 because we're past any kind of deadline that we could reasonably get anything on a referendum, certainly this November, considering we'd have to have the language set 2 months from now. So the earliest we could implement the consolidation with full-time folks or our own standalone department would be 2022, and assuming the passage of a referendum. Do any of the other folks have any other thoughts?
I think the words are exactly right. Saying the earliest 2022. And if things went swimmingly, then 2022 it is. If not, 2023.
And that conversation assumes that referendum takes place in 2021.
Right.
Correct. It would have to happen no later than a special election in probably whatever that first Tuesday would be in November of 2021.
Okay, yeah, maybe we can discuss this when we bring it up, when we talk about it as a joint group.
Agreed. So at this time, we're in agreement on meeting at 2 different locations. We'll be meeting potentially by Zoom. We'll make that decision here shortly between Jenny and myself and Inga, if it's practical to have it either at the town hall or the city council chambers for the commission meeting on the 30th of July, or if we're going to have that virtual again. So that's going to be a little bit determinant upon if any of the circumstances change in the city's facilities. Inga, do you foresee any circumstances that we'd be able to use the facilities for an in-person meeting, or would you recommend we go and continue with digital conferencing for that meeting?
I mean, I'd probably recommend digital still, just because I don't know with the amount of people that you'd probably expect to be at the meeting, if our council chambers or maybe even the town hall could accommodate the physical distancing of that many people.
Right. My concern is that we're going to have too many people try to get on virtual means, and it's going to be difficult to organize that effectively when we have all these other bodies that are interested in having conversations. So
yeah, and
that's my concern.
One thing we can do, since it is the Joint Fire Commission meeting, is to have everyone that's in attendance that's not on the Joint Fire Commission be muted. And we can also ask them to turn off their video. So then you'd only see the people that you want to see, I guess.
Okay.
So that there are some options there that we can try and make it a little bit easier for everybody too.
I don't see circumstances changing dramatically in the next 2 weeks. So I would probably just anticipate a Zoom meeting for July 30th.
Okay, then let's go ahead and plan that. It'll be 7 o'clock as normal. Does that work for people? And
Yes.
there'll be a virtual meeting in Zoom.
Yep.
Sounds good.
In the leisure of your own home. There you go. All right, and then our second meeting will be tentatively between both municipalities on August 19th at 6 o'clock. Is that an effective time?
What time?
6 o'clock.
Rather than 7?
Correct. Simply because I believe it's going to be a very extensive conversation, and I want to ensure we don't stay past midnight. So that extra hour built in might be sufficient for discussion time.
Is that on the 30th you're talking about?
No, we're talking on
the
the
19th.
19th of August. Yeah.
Good.
So potentially the 19th, and if ever that's okay, we'll set that date. And let's plan for an in-person meeting, and then 2 weeks prior or a week and a half prior, we'll follow up if whether or not that's going to be orchestratable, or if we're going to have to change to a different venue or potentially go onto a digital conferencing like we are now. So I'll work with Inga and Jenny on that.
Thank you.
And you'll invite the contracted towns 2 weeks from tomorrow, John?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to reach out to them.
All right. Thank you.
And I will also send them an agenda and everything, so for a reminder.
Thank you, Jenny. All right. If there's no more discussion on old business, we'll move to the second item in old business, is a discussion and possible action regarding placement of the future fire station. And who wants to discuss this? Is this would be Chief Rhodes? Or do we want, I know it was in conversations before that we wanted to establish whether or not we were going to pursue other options of a fire station placement, or just continue pursuing the existing locations property as opposed to relocation. But I know that the city was looking into that option on Hilltop Drive and maybe another location. I just wanted to hear if there are any more feedback points on that.
No, I mean, the city is still looking at the middle of the city, and, excuse me, whoops. Where'd I go? Oh, there. You know, that's looking at the data and the talking with Chief Rhodes and the collection of data that he had taken earlier in the year, that that is still the recommendation. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there any other discussion points on this topic? Does anyone feel any need to take action on this topic, or are we going to proceed to the next item?
I guess
What
I don't,
kind of
I don't feel the need to,
action do
go ahead, Linda.
I was just going to ask, what kind of action would you like? Do you want us to make a motion to approve this based on the information that we were given from our chief in November?
I think
or
the big,
December or January? We've gotten a lot.
I guess I'm confused in that over the past couple of months, the most recent as of last month, I thought that we've asked for clarification of keeping it in its current location, and we've received affirmation that that is where it should remain. So I guess that's where
Who gave
I'm.
us that information, Beth?
Pardon?
Who gave us that information?
Chief, in our.
No, he didn't. No, ask
No.
him. He's right here.
No, the location is as we established on Hilltop Drive in that area.
Did we get any feedback directly from the city on whether that was going to be practical and available?
Mr. Hulick.
Yeah, I think, there's two questions that Brian asked. Is it available? I think the question that we still have is, where along Hilltop? Are we talking about Central Park, or are we talking about King Park? Either one of those could potentially be available in essence, because the city owns both of those sites. Is it feasible? Again, the question would be, is it on which side of Hilltop Drive are we looking? And, the most recent conversation I had with Chief Rhodes, which was not that long ago, the question is how far do we want to go into an analysis if we're not exactly sure what type of station we're building yet? We still don't know what type of fire department we're going to have. If we have a standalone fire department, that's going to require a different station than if we have a consolidated fire department that wouldn't require offices for, a chief and lieutenants and battalion chiefs and fire marshals and things of that nature. If we go with the consolidated, we can build a station similar to the one that's on Kennedy Road in Janesville, for example. So that's why I've been saying for the last several years that we need to decide what type of department we need to be before we decide what station we're going to build. Can we build it in that location? Very likely, but it's just going to come down to what are we building? And there was a push a number of years ago to build the station without figuring out what was even going to be in it. So I think we're headed in that direction. We can evaluate both sides of the street in terms of its feasibility from a stormwater and an access standpoint. But as far as kind of a final site plan, and are we building a 6-bay station or a 3-bay station or a 2-bay station? Are we building a station that's similar to fire station number 1 in Janesville or similar to fire station number 6 in Janesville? Because those are drastically different. Not that we would ever build fire station number 1, but those are drastically different facilities. The amount of land that it would require would be drastically different. So that's why I've been saying that for probably the last 3 years. So
No, and that makes sense. I just needed you to clarify it for us. So.
No problem.
And back to Beth's point, there was, and I don't remember if it was last month's meeting or the meeting prior, it was brought up, and Chief, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I do remember hearing the statement that where the fire department currently sits is the best suitable location currently. So maybe for the future planning, there may be a better location, but considering all the factors of facilities and availability and logistics and having the best ultimate service coverage area for where we're at currently and the associated costs with moving a different location, this is currently the best station on the parcel of land where it's at. So I do remember that very distinctly being discussed and was brought up more than one time in that meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't recall the conversation. I recall working very hard on getting data and GIS information and planning at Hilltop Drive. And I've never came off of that position. If I said that, then it was, maybe I misunderstood the question, but that is the best location for a new fire station, period.
Hilltop Drive.
Yes, sir. Whatever side of the street, it doesn't matter. But, I have not come off of that center at all.
Okay.
Sorry about that, sir.
Well, that's okay.
Can I just ask for some clarification then, as long as we're on this topic? And I understand Al's point, and I completely agree. I think one of my questions is when we're looking at GIS and servicing, that's one thing. But looking at proximity to railroad tracks and high school is another for me. And I'm just trying to find what that looks like when we have really busy time of day for traffic at the high school and what that may look like for our EMS services and fire.
I can answer that. It's probably not going to be any different than having something major happen on Madison Avenue in one of our downtown areas, or like during our morning commutes when we have a lot of traffic on Madison Avenue. I feel like it's kind of the same scenario, and but I appreciate what you're saying, Beth. But I think that once people hear sirens and flashing lights, even the high school kids, I hope that they know that they need to move out of the way, and the bus drivers, this is for their protection too.
Oh, I hear what you're saying, Linda, but I respectfully disagree. I have driven that Hilltop Drive for many years and know that the traffic is municipal is extremely busy at several times during the day. And I'm sure we'd have to have some sort of a stoplight situation if we can. I just think that it's very busy. And yes, it is busy in the downtown area, but we have opportunities to travel in different directions. If we're on Municipal or on Hilltop, there's only that way.
You know, I have to state, Beth, I mean, any community ends up dealing with traffic-based issues. Milton has been a smaller community and they've had a little bit luckier things, even though they've, pulled out of that station and been faced with busy times at Quick Trip and the 2 gas stations and different messes at different times of the day. But you get into other communities, Janesville, for instance, and they pull out and they're at Milton Avenue, and sometimes there's 4 lanes of traffic, or they get further down and they have just a mess when they get down by Festival. And I mean, people have to learn to deal with other traffic issues.
No, I completely hear what you're saying, Teresa. I think in those instances, they have the ability to change lights, and the roads are built for that. So I'm just telling you that I feel like those roads are not the width that it's just different in that respect. In those municipalities, yes, there's significant differences in traffic. At the same time, though, they also have traffic lights that they can change and monitor in that respect.
I think from this,
Mr. Chairman Jennings, may I speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, I've been a school bus driver in Milton for 5 years. That location is probably one of the worst during school times to try to get buses through without trying to get fire trucks through, without buying up some houses and widening the street. That's the only way you can put a fire station in the center of that town.
We have to keep in mind that we have a road that's going to be going all the way out to Town Line Road also. So what we are seeing right now currently is going to affect how we're doing this as far as the traffic around the high school, but there really is no way to anticipate that fire truck is always going to be going up Hilltop Drive and over to the high school. It very well may be going out to Janesville Street. So I don't feel like there is any way that we can say that the traffic is going to work with emergency vehicles or not. I mean, I'm sorry, but I've lived here for 20 years and I've had all three of my kids in different schools the whole time that I've been here. And so I've seen the traffic. We had the opportunity to move the middle school off of the highway and our voters chose not to. At this point in time, I think it's time for us to think about the safety of the community. And I understand that there's a lot of people around all of our schools, but the first thing that those people need to learn is what to do in an emergency situation. And I'm sorry if I'm being a little rough on that one, but we have to take care of our citizens. We have looked at data. We know where our calls are, and the people who we are depending on for our information are the ones who are giving us this information. They're looking at it from the way that they have to do their jobs. And, so what if we have to add an extra light, a yellow flashing light or something, then that means that we have to do it. But I don't think that we should just turn away from doing something just because it's around one of our schools. I mean, our job is to look out and oversee this department and make sure that we can get to our calls. in a timely manner. That's our job. Sorry, I'm not trying to get excited here.
If I could
Mr.
just
Chairman, may I speak again?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim, and then we'll take Al next.
Okay. A traffic study by some professional should be done on Hilltop Drive. You just can't sit and say, well, I like that. We're going to build a new street to the south. It's from Madison to the fire station. That is going to be a serious issue. I'm done, John.
Go ahead, Al.
Well, to a certain degree, Jim actually just took my comment. You know, a traffic impact analysis would be something that we would certainly want to do in either location, frankly. And we can get average daily traffic counts. I mean, let's not forget that Madison Avenue is a state highway. So, you know, an average daily traffic count on Hilltop Drive would not be difficult to do. We could do a traffic impact analysis. There was one done in 2017 in front of the high school, so that information is still available and could be updated. You know, and I understand Beth's point that communities are different. You know, but we could look to Janesville and what their experience is with fire station number 2, I believe, which is literally right across the street from a middle school and within 1 block of a high school at an intersection that has no signals. You know, so, you know, it's not as though that it can't be done. And I have no affinity whatsoever or love for Hilltop Drive or the current location. I could, you know, from my perspective, I want it to go where the best location is. And, you know, I think we need to be honest with the community when we select that location. If the reason we select the location is because it has the greatest response time, then that's a good reason to select that location. If the reason we select the location is because it's the cheapest, then we need to be honest with the community and tell them that. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with either one of those. But I think we need to be honest. The commission needs to be honest in their decision-making process. And if there are challenges with Hilltop Drive, those need to be evaluated from an objective standpoint. And that should be accommodated as part of the site evaluation. But at the end of the day, when the decision is made, the rationale for the decision should be one of honesty.
Absolutely, Al. Thank you for that. And I think in the end of the day, with having that traffic study would be very, very beneficial because it could corroborate each story and say, well, yes, maybe the traffic count is very busy at these points of day during the high school, but maybe the consistency of the traffic flow or the inconsistency of the traffic flow, however it looks, has a big factor upon the response time location. So even though geographically this makes some of the most sense and has the most accessibility, it may not be usable. So there's practicality and whether or not you can implement that practicality. So predictability, I can't remember the actual word, but yeah. So I think we could move forward with talking about this maybe on the next agenda, or we could potentially look into one of those analysis. Unfortunately, with the school being closed, definitely puts a different perspective of what that looks like as far as seasonal, you know, the summertime versus the wintertime versus the springtime versus the fall definitely changes the traffic flow on each of those roads. So without doing a 1-year study or getting as close of a shot of a 1-year study as possible, it's going to be more difficult to predict that traffic count because it is relatively seasonal.
Well, and this year it'll be even greater as a problem because if you only have half the population coming at any given time, it won't be a clear picture as to when there's a full population going because
Absolutely.
of the virus.
Al, could you just, the work that's being done up at the high school, we are straightening out that parking lot intersection, correct? Where Hilltop, not Hilltop,
Yeah, the parking lot along High Street is going to be resituated, so the exit of the parking lot at the high school lines up with the T intersection of Rainbow. And then conversely, along Hilltop Drive, the parking lot exit is going to be aligned with the Orchard Row T intersection. So those will create, more conducive traffic movements with less conflict points. To the point about the variability of traffic, again, I'll state again that a traffic impact analysis was conducted by the Milton School District in 2017. So that data is still very new and probably very relevant. They contracted for that. We certainly have a copy of it. It was performed by Strand and Associates. Certainly we could look to update that information if people felt it didn't encompass enough of a radius within the school district boundaries. But I think the vast majority of that information is probably still very relevant and could give us a great deal of at least objective information to at least start the conversation in terms of ADT, conflict points, lane widths, and things of that nature. So,
John, may I offer something? This is Larry. The other issue we have to keep in mind, regardless of traffic studies, regardless of those issues, it's whether the site can accommodate whatever size station you decide as a commission to build, and as the community is willing to fund. I'm not sure that the current location would necessarily be able to accommodate a station, depending on your decision, just size-wise. And so if you have to buy houses and things like that, the costs go way up to accommodate that, whatever site you have. So that's another issue.
The site that's currently housing the station has the Public Works building behind it. The site is actually a fairly large parcel. It's kind of not super wide, but it does have a lot of depth because it goes pretty far back. So as far as the facilities go and putting a new building on that facility, it would be probably very comparable, if not larger than the plot in, I can't remember what the parks are now. The park where the ice rink is that what you're referring to?
Central.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, they've got to be fairly comparable or nearby. I guess I could look it up and actually measure it out, but I wouldn't imagine that they're too inconsistent from each other.
Well, like Al said, until we actually know what we need, it's not really pertinent.
So is the city going to continue to investigate these options, or would you want to put this on hold until we have better information as far as the operations and the future of the fire department? That's pretty much a priority at this point. It sounds like we're definitely going to move forward with those conversations, but this is going to have to be on the back burner from what it sounds like. We have a lot of things in front of us and we don't want to get too distracted from the main objective of solving the main problem of staffing and figuring out a sustainable model of administration going forward.
Right, we'll wait a little bit.
So if there's no more comments or discussion point on this topic, we'll move to our next discussion item.
I would, if you don't mind, I would just like to add, one of the things that is wrong with our current location is the way that you go out on the back road. We currently we go around the block so that we can give rides on the fire trucks. But it's not really an ideal situation for the people that live back there. And maybe it was 50 years ago when it was built, but I feel like that's kind of not a good situation.
Okay, so hearing no other conversation, we'll proceed to the next item of business, discussion and possible action regarding updating the IGA to incorporate an electronic format for the meetings. So Jenny was kind enough to send everybody a draft of what that looks like. We're to incorporate into the bylaws of how in circumstances where we cannot meet or a meeting is impractical because of the conditions, either with epidemic or whatever unique circumstances prevent us from meeting, that electronic meetings, as long as they are appropriately cited for the community to attend, are acceptable means of conducting business. So did everybody get a chance to review that document prior to the meeting?
Yes.
Were there any comments or concerns about the word verbiage?
No.
Okay with me.
So it's
Sounds
pretty
good.
standard, so not too fancy, not too interesting. So I'll entertain a motion to accept the electronic format for meetings and incorporate it into our bylaws then.
So moved.
Second.
The motion has been properly moved and seconded to amend our bylaws to include electronic format for meetings. This will be a roll call vote since it would be amending the bylaws. So what we'll do is we'll have discussion. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, or hearing none, we'll proceed to a roll call vote. Brian Meyer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Beth, how do you vote?
Aye.
Teresa, how do you vote?
Aye.
Linda, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Bill, how do you vote?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion passes unanimously. All right, we'll move on to new business. Discussion and possible action amending the bylaws to include a vice chairman position. This is another kind of similar change. We're just including the verbiage to allow a second position to be created. The verbiage was pretty clear. It's in the absence of the chair that the business can still be conducted as usual by the vice chairperson, and ensuring that that person is tasked with the same responsibilities in the absence of the chair and be able to sign documents as needed when the chair is unavailable. So that being said, were there any questions about that?
No.
No.
Well, I'll entertain a
Motion
motion.
to approve.
Second.
Motion by Linda, seconded by Bill to approve the vice chairman position in amending the bylaws. Is there any discussion on this point? Hearing none, we'll proceed to voting. Brian Meyer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Beth, how do you vote?
Aye.
Teresa?
Aye.
And Linda?
Aye.
And Bill?
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion passes. We'll amend the bylaws to include the vice chairman position. Now, in recent events, we just created a chairman position. Now we need to fill that with a appropriate corresponding member on the commission. Is there anyone at this time that would like to open nominations for this position?
I guess the intent of the annual appointment is to alternate between the two municipalities.
That was the initial intent, yes. It's not specifically stated to be done that way, but that was the intent. Whether or not that is the commission's wishes, we can discuss that, but the intent was to keep the chairperson affiliated with whatever municipality was tasked with that position, to make sure we had consistency that that municipality was being represented as that chairperson for the year.
I'll nominate Brian Meyer for the vice presidency.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded, and is there any discussion on that? Okay, we'll continue to a vote. I don't think we need a roll call vote on this, do we? Shouldn't.
No.
So I'll just go to the majority vote. All those in favor by appointing Brian Meyer, vice chairperson on the commission, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. Congratulations, Brian. Welcome back.
Just be here.
All right. Well, we covered a lot of things, so hopefully the fire chief's report was thorough enough through everything else. But if you haven't covered everything, Chief, what else do we need to hear from you today?
Okay, you have the financial package, and I think Dan's still online. You can see we're under budget, but Dan, you want to run through the finances real quick?
Yeah, I think I tried my best to summarize it in the email to you, to y'all this afternoon. Right now we're trending under budget. Doesn't look like we're gonna be over budget at all, at least the way things are tracking halfway through the year. So I guess if there's specific questions, I can try to answer them or bring them back or answer them a couple weeks from now when we meet.
So, yeah, Dan, if you don't, or excuse me, thanks, Dan. If it's kind of getting late, as you can tell, it's been a long day. My apologies. Yeah, if there's any questions for the commission, real quick on the financial packet, Dan's here to answer them for you. Okay, we had 115 calls this month. As you know, we're still running the 3+ calls a day. It's busy, and so you know, that's where we're having these conversations. So the call volume is still maintaining. We had no training hours because of COVID-19. I just want to comment on the men and women of the fire department and the command staff on such a outstanding job they've been doing in the face of the virus as it's transitioning. As we all realize, I think at first we thought it'd be over in a month or two or till October. Now it's looking for maybe a year or two. So it's a drain. It's hard, but the morale is still good with the response to the COVID problem. So I'm very pleased and very proud of the men and women of the fire department. And that would be the end of my report because it's getting late.
You.
All right, thank you, Chief. So we'll move on to the president's report. Do we have Scott here? Is it?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
The association's got no new news. Things have been pretty quiet because of COVID. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott. All right, any general items that need to be covered before this meeting? Well, motion to adjourn is in order.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed?
Just want to thank the commission tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ernie.
That's a lot of work.
Thank you. It's
It
been
was
a
a team
long
effort.
meeting.
Team
Thanks,
effort.
Dan.
Team effort. The Jeremy, Pete, and Dan and Luke. So thanks to everybody. Have a good night, folks. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Guys, keep up the good work.